Thank you very much for these kind words. So we're very nearly there. My name is Ursula. I'm one of the organizing teams, and I have the pleasure to introduce our first plenary today. So many of you will be familiar with Alison's work. As an academic, she's exceptionally well known beyond academia, which makes it especially hard for me to put all of her achievements in just a few words this morning. So I'm going to be forcefully very, very brief. As UNESCO chair in refugee interactions through languages and the arts, she's responding to the global refugee crisis, fostering integration and empowering communities. She's based in the School of Education at the University of Glasgow. Her research and methods include decolonization, creative and intercultural methodologies, and restorative methods. Her work regularly takes her to low and middle income countries such as Ghana, Palestine, Sudan, Ethiopia, just to name a few. She was awarded the Teaching Excellence Award for her teaching in refugee studies, critical multilingual studies, religious and spiritual education, anthropology, and intercultural education and non-violence. She holds an OBE for her services to teaching and intercultural and interreligious relations. In addition to her very wide range of academic publications, she regularly makes broadcasts and media appearances, and she has a regular column in the National Scottish Broadcast Press. She also is a poet. Her first collection, Through Woods, was published in 2009. We do not know how she fits all of this into one life and manages to be a thoroughly nice person in addition to this. So I have very long suspected that she's managed to clone herself, but I can assure you that we now have the pleasure of meeting the real Alison. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Ursula, and also to you and Zoe and the organising team in York for one of the least coercive invitations I think I've ever received, and a chance to come back to the great county of Yorkshire, the county of my birth, and to come back in this summer. And as BAAL is a little tiny bit older than myself, it's a really lovely time to come and be with you. And also just want to add my thanks to Sarah Primer for all the amazing ways she's worked with the logistics and organisation, the train strikes, the scamming of some of the plenaries, and all the other exciting things that actually happened as part of this. It's lovely to be here. It's really lovely to be here. This, for everyone else who's at their first ever BAAL conference, is also my first ever BAAL conference, partly because the date has moved, but I feel as though I've just been made a really lovely invitation from those great neighbours in the neighbouring discipline to come and speak to you about what I do next door in the areas of modern languages, multilingualism, work around decolonising, refugee studies, also anthropology. So if my idioms, if my language, if my way of speaking about what I do isn't quite yours, please treat it like an accent. And understand that I'm trying, but I am not quite you yet, even though you're all really kind and have been exceptionally hospitable. And it's wonderful to see so many people I know and have sat and had long, intense conversations with at conferences over the years. It feels very much like this is a conference just as Juha was describing it, of friendly, open-minded people who love to talk about language. Edouard Glissant, recently, thankfully translated into English, thanks to the work of scholars at the University of Liverpool, says, "J'écris parmi toutes les langues du monde." I write in the presence of all the languages in the world. And then he says, I take my own language and I shake it up and shift it around, not into syntheses, but into linguistic openings that allow me to conceive of the relations between languages today on the surface of the planet. Relations of dominance, of complicity, absorption, oppression, erosion, contact. As a huge drama, a huge tragedy from which my own language cannot remain exempt and safe. I'm reading those words in English translation. They were written in French. What he says of French, he could also say of English, or Portuguese, or Spanish, or Amhara, or Chinese, or many of the other languages that are big and muscular in the ways that they can make things move and change for good or for ill. We know this in applied linguistics. We tend to mostly talk about it in English. One of the things I do when I'm really struggling with what's going on in meetings, particularly research strategy meetings, is I write poetry in the margins of my notes. Here's one. From policy to poetry. Transfer the knowledge, bank the education, roll it out, I tell you, across China. Fill the 7 seas with these words, these my words, and these ways, these my ways. May all be competent, efficient, competent, professional, efficient, competent. Yes, I repeat, professional, competent. It is our settled will that having settled our will, we will settle for competence, efficiency, professionalism. This is the policy, ours, our policy. This will deliver up a curriculum for excellence, standards for success, and across the 7 seas, there will be competence and excellence between us, and ceaseless efficiency and professional success. And between us, there will be success, I say. Standards, quality, and of the rolling out, there will be no end. In place of rest, efficiency. In place of beauty, excellence. In place of diversity, national standards. In place of brokenness and the tenderness which is learning's due, quality's raw. In place of dancing, rolling out. And there, look, in the path of the excellent rollers, there were, crushed now, violets. That poem for me goes to the heart of much of what you're wanting to explore and open up in BAAL this year. Opening up what language can do, what language can control, what language can dominate, what language can enable in a performative way, but also underneath it, those almost hidden question of, but for whom? These words that create transparency, professionalism, all of these words about our openness also beg the question, who is this serving? Is it our masters, and I use that word advisedly? Who does our work serve, and who does it trouble? And can we as linguists, as people who work with language in however we do it, live with integrity, with our own answers to those questions? So my title, What's So Good About Transparency, is really working with elements of transparency that I've been on the receiving end. You may all at some point have received what is known in the UK as the Friday afternoon email, timed to go out, usually at 16:58, by people who have worked on it for a long time. This was sent on the 11th of March 2021, a few days after International Women's Day, by the UKRI, which is our research funding body, the umbrella organisation. It simultaneously was posted online as it was sent to the Vice-Chancellors of the UK universities. And it announced in language which is highly marked by national standards and quality that the Vice-Chancellors would have received information about overseas development assistance project funding, and that they regret to inform everybody that the contracts we'd all signed that said that we would receive our funding until the end of the funding that we were delivering was cease pretty much overnight, and that there was no prospect of this being continued. At this point in time, I and many other scholars across the UK were holding research from the Global Challenge Research Fund designed to open up our work and our money to people in low to middle income countries in what's often called the Global South. And overnight, the UK government cut that funding by 80%. I went from having a research portfolio worth a total of £25 million to having a research portfolio that was a major liability to my own institution, but far more importantly, meant that of around 120 scholars across 20 low to middle income countries, I was looking at terminating all contracts overnight. And this is the discourse used to do that. Hannah Arendt said, in different times to these, but ones with structural similarity, that evil comes from a failure to think. It defies thought, for as soon as thought tries to engage itself with evil and examine the premises and principles from which it originates, it is frustrated because it finds nothing there. It's hollow, it's empty speech, rather like those words I'm pulling that have been emptied of content from my poem from too many times of hearing about quality and competence. And then she says, that is the banality of evil. We've all heard of the banality of evil. I think it's really important for us as thinkers to really stand on that ground of what a failure to think can mean, and what it means to think and to do the thinking we're doing, often in disputatious ways. We started a campaign to get the money back. We decided we weren't just going to accept that there was no prospect of this happening. And I'm here to tell you that it took us nearly 9 months, but we managed to get the money back. This is me a couple of days after the announcement, with full permission of my university, beginning the campaign to try and get the money back for our colleagues in the Global South, whilst reprofiling. I didn't know reprofiling was a word at that point. I thought a profile, was something like that. But the number of times I seem to have had cosmetic surgery on my nose during this period of reprofiling was really quite extraordinary. The Guardian decided it wanted to do an article about this and wanted a picture of an academic, and they said, looking windswept and angry. So this is me with an appalling headline, I must say, in The Guardian. Those of you doing media discourse analysis, please tear this to pieces. In despair at what was happening, in absolute despair at what was happening with this work. So yeah, this is me looking at what happens when I have to find a way of taking that Friday afternoon email and getting in touch with scholars in Zimbabwe, in Ghana, in the Gaza Strip, in Mexico, in Burkina Faso, in Cote d'Ivoire, and actually enabling people to understand that this fantastic work, this great piece of work that was honouring and enabling and developing the work of scholars in the Global South and allowing us to work together on a decolonising project where the majority funding went south, was over, was over, was over.
I'm aware. Those no shiba kushangana British is Todin manje. Todin.
My colleagues said to me, this is violent news. My colleagues said, and I'm translating, This is what happens when you take money from the British. My colleagues said, we will be arrested. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the great scholar of decolonizing, who wrote Decolonising the Mind and who made a decision to write in his native Kikuyu, said that it is the lot of those in low to middle income countries to accept theft or die. What did we do? We started a campaign. Eventually we got the money back. It took a very long time, but one of the things we did was decide that we needed to do a little bit of what I'm now calling revenge scholarship, and actually just look at the discourse that was being used by the people doing these violent acts to our colleagues, and to do some critical metaphor analysis. So my colleague Gracia Imperiale decided that what she would do would be write a really excellent piece, you can read it in the Journal of Multicultural Discourses, called Cuts, Destroy, Hurt and Kill, a critical metaphor analysis of the response of UK academics to the UK overseas aid budget funding cuts. It's a great paper that she wrote. She did it with me, but it's one of those where I would say 95% of that work was hers. Really important that we don't just take it, but that we use what we have, that we continue to think, and we're able to engage in a way of using our scholarship to make sure there's a record of what the violence has done and what our disciplines can do to respond. So a few months later, around about August 2 years ago, we received another Friday afternoon email at 16:58 for more transparency, more opening up, more we want to engage with you stuff from UKRI, saying this, and this is after we've reapplied for all our money twice. So this was one of the things that had to happen to satisfy the new criteria that had been brought in. And this is what it said. UKRI then applied the good cost effectiveness multiplier based on the mode score, applying the Bayes value for money methodology. The average score, rubric score, times the worthwhileness multiplier. After applying the cost effectiveness multiplier, the value for money score translates into the final score, which equals 4. Yeah. We didn't understand either, but this is the discourse we're working with in these areas where this is transparency in terms of speaking with academics about the funding and about the livelihoods, the lives and the potential freedoms of our colleagues in the Global South. And those colleagues in the Global South are colleagues who are working on areas that fall into those ethical domains around human integral development, gender-based violence, children having the right to education, the right to freedom of movement, the rights of freedom of expression, the things that come under the Sustainable Development Goals. We wrote back to UKRI and said, can you tell us what the score's out of? And they literally wrote back and said, we don't know yet, we can tell you in October. So it could have been out of 100, which would have been a fail. Could have been out of 10, would have been a fail. Could have been out of 5, oh, maybe we'll get the money back. Against criteria which were not the criteria that we had to apply for in the first place. Or it could have been out of 4, it turns out it was out of 4, but that decision was taken later. I am still waiting for a response to my Freedom of Information request on what the worthwhileness multiplier actually is and how it is determined. If anybody knows, I'll be very happy to hear.
We are all here in the awaiting room. I am here in the awaiting room, flicking through a copy of How to Know the Know-How, A View of the Experts, Volume 9. From here on referred to as HTKTKAVOTEV9. I am here in the awaiting room, fiercely needing healing So a doc of any sort will do. A doctor, a document, a documentary will do. Fingertips tipsy with the thrill as I finger tiptoe my way around the highly intoxicating pages of How to Know the Know-How, A View of the Experts, Volume 9. From here on, referred to as STKTKA VOTE V9. We are all here in their waiting room. We need a specialist. We want an ologist. We want things quantified by someone qualified in How to Know the Know-How, A View of the Experts, Volume 9. From here on, referred to as HTKTKA VOTE V9. We are all here. The infected and the affected, slowly mutating from patient to impatient. Tensions are running high, the vaccine is in short supply. Funny symptoms are no laughing matter. Deadly serious is disease of expertise.
May I introduce my colleague and poet, Tawana Sitole. As you can hear in those words, and as you can hear also in the words of Pillay, epistemic violence is part of our ambiance, is part of what a university is here to do as well as to undo. Because the university, says Pillay, is a place of authoritative knowledge, certified knowledge. It is at the heart of epistemic violence. It is where authorized and legitimate knowledge is cultivated, preserved, protected, but also changed. And applied linguistics, as we know, can be both restorative or perpetrating of that violence, which is why we meet every year to look again at how we talk and how we think and how we speak about who we are and what we do and what we are implicated within. One of my bugbears for a long time in modern languages has been, oh, why are you learning that language? Or what language do you speak? My language, I speak, I have, my English. My individual competence, where are you on the Common European Framework of Reference? My acquisitiveness of the language, language acquisition, my consumption even now in these ages of Duolingo and technology and things that you can do without needing to actually interact with people, all outsourced and opened up in the name of openness. A very particular, individualized, Western, we might say, way of understanding language. Language as possession. It's a problematic way of us speaking about what we do, and we're trying to change it. Ubuntu, a person is made by other people. There isn't a single word I utter that hasn't been given to me by somebody else, that hasn't been worked on by the ancestors, and especially by my mother tongue, my mother language. Again, words we need to think about and weigh. And then the other bugbear of me, the open ways in which we opened ourselves to danger, the way we talk about what we do with data, the extractivist attitudes we have to language. What Michael Cronin has said is the fossil fuel of rhetoric which we burn in our universities. The way we talk about mining the data, codifying the data, cleansing the data, mapping the data, capturing the data. You know, you can see as I say those words what the problem is, because that's exactly the language we have used across low to middle income countries to take out the cobalt, to mine the gold, to extract and to possess what others have on their land, and to threaten the life and the future life of the planet. This open strip mining, as we might call it, of our methodological violence and our extractivist concepts. The colonial knowledge production built the violence of the Anthropocene, this age that the Royal Geological Society has controversially said is where climate is made, geological time is made by our human actions, and where our work, to quote Bayo Akomolafe, is to bring it in, to capture it, to have it for ourselves. This has become toxic to our survival. And these conceptualizations, these lingering traces, as Glisson says, of the colonialisms into which our work was born and which describe and perform it, are no longer good ethically, politically, or even in terms of scholarship, if, as Glisson would say, they ever were. In his introduction to the wonderful book, just translated in 2020, the Introduction to the Poetics of Diversity, Glisson says, "Do we not see we are no longer able to guarantee the formal uniqueness of our language, and that we all have to invent multiple forms whose baroque demands frighten us?" And I was looking through the program and I can feel the anxieties that Glisson writes about in his philosophy, that we have too in language disciplines and in intercultural disciplines. It's a fraught space. This is a difficult time. We don't quite know how to speak without causing offense. These are hard things to do with words, but this is where we stand, and this is where we are moving into a multiplicity, a pluriverse, into the tout monde that Glisson speaks of.
Words. Words are so rude to enter without knocking. Words so hard to control. Verbs always doing what they like. Prepositions always seeming out of place. And as for nouns, they're such monsters. As adjectives have that habit of exaggerating. It's so unpredictable. Just before they arrive in the ears. Now, I don't know what I didn't mean to say. I forgot words are like food, have to be cooked well, as you may have to eat them. So I hope these words treat me kindly.
Achille Mbembe, who wrote on the post-colony and is a great scholar of decolonisation, Cameroonian and working in South Africa, says this, and it's a complicated set of understandings in his philosophy about our Western epistemologies. He says we should first remind ourselves that as a general rule, the experience of the other, or the problem of the I of others and of human beings we perceive as foreign to us, has almost always posed virtually insurmountable difficulties to the Western philosophical and political tradition. In other words, most of us trained in these traditions, whether within the Western framings that we understand or in the areas where we have sent those framings worldwide, are going to struggle to think the new worlds into being and to find a way forward. We are going to need precisely the people who were cut by the UK government in those research funding, who know how to think in different ways, to think through collectivisms, to think through enduring gift economies, to think with indigenous understandings of land and language, to think with what Glisson has said is the return from the shift to text to the move to literacy. But equally, we need to be a wee bit cautious. This is an anonymous meme that does the round, sent to me by Charles Forsdyck, but it is a really rather wonderful problematization of what we mean by all these cardinal points. The West, where is it? The North, who are they? The South, what do we mean? Is it a metaphor? Is it a geopolitical term? Is it an ethical term? Is it a funding term? We don't really know. It's all open for us to try and find what we mean when we say the West. This is an exhausting time to be engaging in thinking, to be encountering what evil has done or what it continues to do. This is the dominant scripting, but this scripting in our society, the script that says we will be saved by technology, by therapy, by consumerism, just, spend more to get out of the the deficit, and that militarism, the arms trade, it socializes us all. It cannot, says Walter Brueggemann, make us safe, and it cannot make us happy. And we've tried really hard. We've opened ourselves up in our language markets to the markets will decide elements. Language exports, language couriers, translation, the dominance of certain languages in particular, especially English. The ELT industry is one of the greatest exports of the United Kingdom to the world. It is a massive garnerer of money. One of its impacts is that the native languages of my colleague Tawana are no longer taught at a single university in Zimbabwe because they're not profitable. One of the upshots of it is that the native languages of my colleague Hiab Johannes are no longer taught in any university in Eritrea. In fact, there are no universities left in Eritrea. They were all closed in 2003. So the ways in which our work improves the workings and the delivery of English has consequences that we do not see and do not hear about, often because our colleagues are under real danger because academic freedom may not pertain in those places. I did a piece of work a few years ago on the taxonomy of languages that are taught at higher education level in Scotland with my colleague Giovanna Facetta. And it was interesting to see what it told us about ourselves as a set of symbols. It told us that we liked old languages, Greek and Latin. It told us that in a few places we thought that maybe we should learn Gaelic as an indigenous language of Scotland. It told us that we liked going on holiday to places like Tuscany and Seville. It told us that we still signed up to the Entente Cordiale of de Gaulle and that French and German were our dominant foreign languages. And it told us that in one place we thought it might be good for someone to study classical Arabic. And that, my friends, was it for formal degree program teaching. It didn't tell us we thought we should be able to speak to our neighbours in Ireland or Norway or Iceland. It didn't tell us that we thought we should be able to speak the language of the people living in our communities, the majority languages in Scotland of Urdu or of Polish or of Tigrinya or of Arabic or of Cantonese. It told us that we were traders and that money mattered most. So that's the misery. Let me, in the last few minutes, give you something a bit more hopeful. So I don't know if any of you have read this book, but this was my book of the year last year. The Dawn of Everything, it's a grand title. A New History of Humanity, so quite grandiose. It's a glorious invitation, not unlike the one that you gave to me to open things up, which is trying to look at a different way of looking at archaeological research and what happens when it meets anthropology, and to tell a different story about what that evidence shows, just as we are trying to tell different stories about our evidence, as we open our worlds out beyond the English, beyond the fact that most of us were forced to be educated in what I have called way too many colonial languages, way too many dominant and powerful languages. And one of the things the authors say, the late great David Graeber and David Wengrow, is that most of our pre-existing theories of human history are mostly wrong, extremely dangerous, and my favourite, unnecessarily dull, which allows us to really keep opening up and trying things out, in engaging in what I'm calling rigorous restorative methodologies, and methodologies particularly following Bayo Akamolafo of fugitivity. He says what people in low to middle income countries, what people who've survived slavery, violence, what the people I work with day in, day out, the people I know who are messaging me on my phone as I speak, saying, can you just, we need a bit of help, we are a bit stuck, this is the situation for refugees in the UK, that fugitives know how to be rigorous. Fugitives know how to think creatively. Fugitives know when transparency will serve, and fugitives love opacity because opacity is a shelter space. Opacity can keep you safe. Opacity can mean that somebody like me in a safer place can speak about things that others are not safe to articulate. It means collectivizing, it means working together, it means asking ourselves, for whom do we articulate these thoughts? So this rigorous restorative methodology is about decolonizing, and that's everyone's task. I don't hold to the tune that says only people who live in former colonies can decolonize. I think that the work that my people did in colonizing equally requires that difficult, fraught, decentering, decreative work. That I need to think about how I live, work, articulate my work differently to try and experiment with things that might make more room for others to be part of this. Decreating, as Simone Weil calls it, deconstructing, destituting, following Maladona Torres and Mignola and my colleague Hiab Johannes, destituting violence in all its forms. In other words, taking away its power to do its violent work and saying, we will work with this differently. We will find different ways of inhabiting the space. Destituting our extractivisms, which created the Anthropocene and placed people in precarious positions. And to do that, what I've been doing philosophically, but also practically in the life I live, is using a permaculture design philosophy. Permaculture is about gardening. It's about making the most of the space you have. It's about diversity and multiplying the edges. It's about small, slow, often hidden solutions. It's about having human beings as part of what we do, not taking ourselves out and pretending we're not part of it. It's about being in a grand ecology. And for multilingualism, it's of course about all the multilingualisms that we have in the world. All of it is going to be an open struggle, and struggle is not messy. Whoever it was who kindly laughed when I dropped my apple on the floor because I was fingers and thumbs in breakfast this morning, it's going to be a bit like that. We're going to be a bit nervous, we're going to be ungainly, we're not going to quite know what we're doing. We're used, as Western scholars, to being able to do this quite seamlessly, to being able to trust our methods. We're going to have to be a bit like language learners again, and we're going to make a lot of mistakes. So we're going to need to be kind to each other as we do. Akomolafe says, you can think about the fugitive as a way of navigating the world, as a way of knowing the world. And Carson says it's a way of becoming unlost, because we are lost, and of being honest and open about the lostness of our work. Opacity can be a sheltering. It can, obfuscation of can be a way of staying safe. The multilingualisms of the people I work with on a daily basis are home, are a place to be safe in exile, are a way of saying there's food here and this lawyer is a good one and this barge is not to be inhabited. You're better to run than to go there. The multilingualisms that articulate that are opaque to the structures of the state, which is one of the reasons why Glissant embraced it. And these modes of expression become life-saving for people. So we need to be careful about opening up, about what is open and what needs out of necessity to be closed or difficult or misunderstood, or even more importantly, and probably the most important lesson I've learned in recent years, not transparent to me. Just because I'm a principal investigator, just because I'm a UNESCO chair, just because I'm a professor, just because I sign off on the budgets, doesn't mean I need to know the detail of everything. What is a harder thing to learn is the trust that means that people will stay safe. This is how we create places of dignity within our research. Multilinguality in our work, and it's fantastic to hear Juha talking about the ways you want to open up to more than English. Multilinguality as a fugitivity of relation might be how this is described by Akomolafe and Glissant. So it's an open question to you. I don't have many answers, but I have lots of experiments and great colleagues like Tawana who can just insert something different for us to go, what, how, why, That isn't really very articulate, but it's the start of something new. It's the sounds that you hear children make when they're learning to breathe or learning to speak. How can applied linguistics become open to fugitivity, inhabit decoloniality with those in different positions, be unlost but also not found? And you can make of that what you will. I liked it as a coinage. I've openly failed at this. 10 years ago, we were funded, along with a fabulous translanguaging project that Juha and others were involved with, to offer a project called Researching Multilingually at the Borders of the Body, Language, Law and the State. We were doing decolonizing methods. Working and researching multilingually was our way of saying this is what we need to do. And we just kept failing. We did it in law, we did it in medicine, we did it in education, we did it in applied linguistics, we did it in literature studies, and we found it incredibly difficult because everything is in English. And we do all present in English, and you do all understand English. And those of you for whom English wasn't a mother language, you are very, 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 very good at the academic English that we speak. And we don't want to disrespect you by taking the years of study that you have put into being able to do this away from you. I can't tell you how much it hurts when I go to conferences in Germany, having learned German for years, and it's all in English, to accommodate me. Jawohl. So we failed. We have lots of evidence of how we failed. We've written a lot about how we failed. The one area where we found we could actually research multilingually was in practice-led, open-air settings on the equator in low to middle income countries, where we put on a large performance from which many of these images that you see on my slides come, with young people who spoke about 7 different languages. Theoretically, English was the language of the country. In practice, it wasn't. But when my skin was in the room, everyone spoke English. And we had a really narrow set of conceptualizations coming out of colonial models of education, and the work we wanted to do more widely was lost. It changed. I had a bit of a meltdown about this situation. I've worked for 20 years to do a multilingual project, and now I have the money, and you're all speaking English. The failure, the shame, the humiliation, the frustration, when it really matters, because you know that if we try this differently, amazing things will come, and you want to see that. And the next day, my colleague Tawana began the workshop in Shona. And I refused to speak anything other than German all day. And every single one of the participants spoke in their mother language. And so it continued for 6 weeks. We produced a play on time and on budget for the funders, if they're listening. They might not be. They might have switched off in the earlier critical stages of this talk. But we managed to do this in a way that built a poetics of relation, that led to a playfulness with language. We started to compose music, thanks to my colleague, Dr. Gamali Todro, that echoes the beat and the rhythm and the accent that you hear in Twi and Ga and Hausa when it's spoken, and in Dangbe, the language of the rainforest that I didn't know existed before I went to enable this work. I, a professor of languages, how humiliating, how very good that was the situation, that my deficit could be educated by those who knew and those who spoke. Our failure was our favorite work, our failure was fun, our failure made it possible. Thank you, Ursula. That's more than I thought I had, so you might be in luck. Intentional multilingual fugitivity. I made English flee the room. I could, because of my position, I could dictate that. I could say, we will inhabit this. And, putting English last, not saying English won't be there, won't be lived, won't be what I'm translating into, won't be present in some of the words that are spoken, but putting English last, or insert colonial language of choice. It could be Amhara, it could be Portuguese, it could be French or Spanish, whatever the language is that's the dominating one, or it could be in a very small area. It could be the trade-off between Scots and Gaelic in parts of the city of Glasgow. Whatever the dominant language is, whatever the one that feels like it's taking over, without really having asked permission, elbowing its way in and going, oh, I think we'll have that, and I think we'll shop here, and I think we'll just take this. Wherever that's going on in relations, as Glisson said, all the languages of the world, wherever that's happening, if we intentionally make room for those other languages to have comfort of articulation, amazing things happen. Yes, it's opaque. Yes, I would have to wait, sometimes 15 minutes, for the translations to go through 7 different people whilst we were discussing a dance move that would be performed on stage. And yes, towards the end, as everyone was playful with this, the dancers would go, so Alison, have you got the gist yet? What do you think we've said? And I would be examined by the children, and I would give my response, and they would give me a mark out of 10, or maybe out of 4, but without telling me what it was out of. That opacity, that time for translation, giving it time. Giving it time. One of my favourite anecdotes is about meeting Dr. Al-Jafari, who was the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Iraq after the war, the second of the wars we perpetrated in my lifetime in Iraq. And we met with him, and he wanted to speak to us, and he spoke through an interpreter all the way through the meeting. He gave everything in Arabic. And I had recourse to the expression in the discussion we were having, a hermeneutics of suspicion. I was clearly feeling a bit insecure in his presence and wanted to assert my identity as a scholar because I was using these big words. So a hermeneutics of suspicion. The translator was struggling. And I have enough Arabic to know that what then happened was that Dr. Al-Jafari turned to the translator and told the translator what that meant in Arabic. My first response was outrage. How dare you be so inefficient as to waste money on translation when we could have had more time and we didn't need to do that. And then I understood. Here is a man presiding over one of the situations of the greatest violence in the world, dealing with what my country has done in that land, which I had also experienced in Syria just before the outbreak of the Syrian war, when I was meeting with a very few of the 1 million Iraqi refugees displaced to Syria by that war. He knew he needed to understand. He knew he needed time to understand. He knew he needed to speak and hear in his own language, the language of his dignity, his heritage, his power. And he needed me to hear it in the language of my heritage, my dignity, and my power. And when we did that, a permacultural move, multiplying edges, we could speak to one another, despite what lay between us and the many bodies that lay between us. Time for translation, slowness, incoherence, mistakes, untranslatability, discomfort, conflict, all leading to what Glisson calls the Baroque, or what in the work of Deleuze and Guattari we might think of as rhizomic thinking, something that is impenetrable, something that isn't opened up. I often say Deleuze and Guattari cannot possibly have had a garden and tried to get iris out of the ground, because they wouldn't write in such celebratory ways about rhizomes had they struggled with the struggle I have with Crocrosmia and iris on my allotment. Opening up. My work has always taken place in the open air theatre, open air drama, open air performance, being in the open air with tourists and migrants, thinking about what happens when we move out of this white cube, as my colleague Tawana speaks of it, of the classroom, and see what happens when we multiply the edges. For that point of view, lockdown was great for my work and my research. I was literally in my element. So what we're trying to do with this, what I think we're trying to do, and what you're trying to do, and what I see in the programme, is not turning the world upside down so that we just reverse hierarchy and power structure and the narrowness, but actually trying to create together a world that institutes new ways of being with power well. Allowing a system to come into balance again, allowing a permacultural balance, and where the ethical questions become ones about the expansion of the space that we inhabit for diverse forms of joy and the necessary local forms of resistance, as Glisson puts it. For me, that's a poetics in the widest sense of the word, the way in which you're playing with concepts yourselves, but also in a formal sense of the word, it's about poetry, opening up the world, because the new world is not given whole any more than the new self is given abruptly in psychotherapy. It's given one tiny poem at a time, one healing at a time, one pronouncement at a time, one law at a time, one conference at a time, one paper at a time, one commandment at a time. Or as Glisson says, translation is flight, fugitivity, or a beautiful relinquishing of what no longer serves. And to do this, we need open hands. We need courtesy and ceremony. Precision won't do, says the poet Podrigo Tuma, for this kind of healing. There is no word big enough for many, for the hell that has been survived. There are concrete resistances that must be undertaken in our contexts, in the place where we are, where we find ourselves, and all the rest is relation, openness, and relativity. And I'm adapting Glisson's words here, can no longer live in a monolingual way.
Quite commonly in Zimbabwe, children play skip rope. And this is one of the songs. So the rope is going, and you're waiting, you're waiting, you're waiting. Christopher Columbus was a great man. He went to America. Once in a while I hear the comment, "You speak good English." In my school days it was a compliment, but at some point it got a bit complicated. I have good memories of school, though I cannot remember exactly what period we got history, or why geography kept getting moved around, though I can remember that English came after math, of a hectic timetable. Learning English was easy at first, but at some point it got a bit complicated. Some of my peers got a bit fierce in their determination to speak good English. I wish this good English was good enough to translate the shock of hearing people mispronouncing their own names in order to sound more English. I wish this good English was good enough for untwisting of the tongue-tied, bristly brush to briskly brush themselves aside. I really could have done with a better student's companion to help clarify some questions of spelling. Was it supposed to be copying or coping we were meant to be doing? And where was that trusted student's companion to help detect silent letters and other landmines just waiting to burst into laughter, humiliation, nicknames, and other dramatic shrapnel embedded in so many innocent victims? I really could have done with a better student's companion to help clarify some questions of pronunciation. Was it supposed to be a minute silence we were meant to be observing, to reflect on our loss, reflect on our neglect? What happened to my mother tongue? My tongue, mother. But nowhere to start or how to react. So it's just a smile, a little awkward smile, my euphemism for words.
Hey, Kani, thank you.
I feel the best response at this moment in time for me would be speechless, I think, and I really am. Thank you so much. I have 1,000 questions in my head. I would really recommend that we try and grab Alison in any of the many opportunities that will come, break time, lunches, and so forth, because unfortunately, at this moment in time, we've run out of time for questions. I also fear that if they do arise and we start a conversation, it would be so incredibly deep that we will be here for hours. So I think it'd be wise now to give her a final thank you, and then to say, for those who want to be in the exhibition center, please make your way across the lake. And for those who want to stay in this part and follow in Spring Lane, then please stay in this building. Thank you.